All right, it's 3 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the PrEP webinar. My name is Jen Sperduto, and I'm joined by my colleague, Dawn Reinhardt-Wood, and we are from the Rutgers State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative, or the SPREE team. Martia, you are muted. Okay. Today's PrEP webinar is called Smart Recovery in an Inpatient Psychiatric Setting. And this is being presented by Katie Onitiri and Kenneth Kinter, and I will introduce them a little bit further in a minute. I wanted to let you guys know this is an interactive webinar. We encourage you to ask questions throughout and participate. You can either use the chat box and type your question, or if you'd prefer to speak, or maybe you're a slow typer, you can raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone and you can ask your question or participate that way. Dawn and I are going to be monitoring the chat box. And so we'll see your hand go up if you want to do that, or any questions that you might have. As always, a recording of this webinar will be available by tomorrow on the Rutgers SPREE website, and Dawn will post that link for you. And also at the end of the webinar today, we're going to have a link to a training evaluation. On the training evaluation, we'd love your feedback, but also it's a place where you can get a certificate of completion or attendance for attending today's webinar. And also you're able to download all of the PowerPoints and the resources that were used in today's PrEP webinar. Just a quick disclaimer that the Psych Rehab Educational Program, or PrEP, is an online forum of a variety of topics relevant to the state psychiatric hospital staff. And while Rutgers and the Division of Behavioral Health Services are co-sponsors of the program, the PrEP webinars are peer presented, and as such, the content is developed by the presenter or presenters each month. And therefore, all of the opinions expressed in the program are those of the speakers and not necessarily the views or positions of the organizations or entities that they represent. We are being recorded so that we can post the recording of the webinar on the website. So just be mindful of that. And I'd love to introduce you to today's presenters. Our first presenter is Katie Onitiri. And Katie, as you might know, is the supervisor for co-occurring services at Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. She's also an adjunct professor at Rider University and a clinical supervisor at TCNJ. Katie has worked in criminal justice, child welfare, and state psychiatric hospitals for over 15 years and has a passion of teaching communities about mental health, breaking the cycles of recidivism, addiction, and violence. Katie is also a licensed psychotherapist. She owns a private practice. She enjoys traveling with her husband and kids, and she is a published author. And we have Ken Kinter with us, and Ken is one of us on the SPREE team. Ken is an assistant professor at Rutgers on the SPREE team, where he provides training, consultation, and technical assistance to the New Jersey State Psychiatric Hospitals, focusing on motivational interviewing and implementing evidence-based practices. Kent has a ton of experience working with people with mental health issues and addictions throughout his 30-year career. He's worked in jails and psych emergency settings and partial care programs. Ken is working on his Ed.D right now with a focus on predicting and preventing 30-day readmissions to state hospitals. He is also a published author, and he and his wife operate a therapy practice in Bordentown. He likes to play bass and loves animals and all that good stuff. So welcome, Katie and Ken. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I am going to turn it over to Katie, and I'm going to turn off my camera and pass the mic to you. Just let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Thank you. I'm to be here. So today we're going to discuss different things. So by the end of this training, you'll be able to describe SMART recovery, differentiate between SMART and 12 steps, and recognize the structure of a SMART recovery meeting, because that's very important for fidelity, and identify different facilitation tools and techniques, and also identify barriers to SMART recovery. Next slide.
All right, so hello, I'm Ken. To pick up from there, self-management and recovery training, which is what SMART stands for. We'll talk about little confusion between different types of SMART. It's a global community of mutual support groups. And we're going to be, one of the first things we're going to talk about is there's a lot of similarities with the 12 steps and what it is and how it's set up, but there are also some significant differences. But the main goal is to help people resolve problems with addictions. However, I'm also finding out that it's also helpful in a self-help capacity, and we'll talk about that a little later as we go. The idea is to not only get help with addiction, but also to be able to help live a balanced life. And we'll talk about the details of how that goes. Next slide, please.
So we have statistics here to just validate how important substance use is and the impact that it has in the community, the different disorders that are prevalent, and also this shows how treatment is so important and how what population affects texture. So on one side, we have the different substance use disorders and how important it is, and then also how many people in the US are obtaining treatment these days. And so as we talk about smart recovery, we're not just talking about substance use. Also, smart recovery is good for other addictions like internet, impulsive buying, shopping, sexual behavior, as well as skin picking, any type of behavioral addiction. Smart recovery is really a good supplement to help them on their recovery process. Next slide, please.
So Smart Recovery started out as a nonprofit and actually started as sort of an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, I believe it started out with a different name, the Rational Recovery it started out as. So some of you might be familiar with that as its former name. It was really put out there as an alternative, but it's kind of taken on a life of its own, and now it's not seen as a backup plan to 12 steps anymore. It's endorsed by communities of professionals and has become worldwide. It's nowhere near the size of AA, as you can see here, but it is becoming more and more prevalent. And I think the idea is that Smart Recovery should be offered as an alternative alongside of AA and the other 12-step modalities. And you see a lot of Smart Recovery also in correction settings as well. I think it got a really early foothold in the correctional system, and now it's moved more into psychiatric and other types of facilities. Next slide, please. So the main differences between Smart Recovery and the 12 steps, there are more similarities than differences, but the differences are important. So starting with the aspects of Smart Recovery, it focuses on a 4-point program, and the 4 points are not meant to be sequential. So AA has the 12 sequential steps that we'll be talking about more in a little bit. These are just 4 different domains, if you will, that you cover: motivation, how to deal with urges, problem solving, and then living a healthy life. Whereas in 12 steps, you have a sequence that goes through various stages of acknowledging addictions, character defects, things like amends, and all that sort of thing. The other thing I would mention is the 12-step model tends to be an abstinence-based model. Unless it's geared toward a non-abstinence-based addiction like sex addiction, there isn't a stance for moderate use. Smart Recovery doesn't say yes, doesn't say no. It's something that you need to incorporate to your own recovery to see what works for you. So here you see the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I highlighted things that are some things that have been kind of picked out by some criticisms, I should say. So part of it is, even though Alcoholics Anonymous puts itself out as a non-religious organization, it does describe itself as spiritual, and there's a lot of mention of God in there. Now they substitute it by saying higher power, so you figure out what your higher power is. But God shows up in there a lot. The male pronoun God shows up in there a lot, and they're primarily talking about the Judeo-Christian God. So the concern is that you might be excluding or putting people off by having that orientation, even if you say, well, look, it doesn't have to be God. There's also been some criticism of 12 steps, and I'm a 12-stepper. I'm a huge fan, but there has been the allegation made that people in 12-step programs can be a little, what's the word I'm looking for, preachy. And sometimes that is off-putting to people as well. Specifically, and Katie will talk more about this later, we work in involuntary facilities. So if people are already coming in ambivalent at best, we don't want to give them anything else that they can latch onto and say, well, I don't want any part of this. And you can see how these go through sequentially, and it takes years to go, through these, but this is sort of the foundation of AA and all of the derivative 12-step programs, but also the separation where SMART takes some of these concepts but goes in a different direction with them. Next slide, please.
Okay, so based on the information that we shared so far, what do you think the benefits of using SMART recovery versus a 12-step program would be?
Feel free to chat your answer in the box, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to speak.
So based on what you've learned so far about 12 steps in SMART recovery and their differences, what do you think the benefits of using SMART recovery versus 12-step program would be?
So some of the answers that are coming in, it says it can appeal to a wider range of people. It might be, it might be more inviting for those who do not want to be abstinent or want to use on occasion. No admission to character defects, which can be hard to acknowledge, less religiously based. SMART recovery might appeal to people who don't believe in a higher power, people who have hangups with the God terminology or difficulty understanding the higher power concept may engage. SMART can come across as more respectful of individual choice and is not off-putting for people of different faiths. SMART recovery helps individual across population, not specific to addiction only. And SMART feels more individual workload versus AA group format can be socially more supportive. And someone else said that they like the more individualized format.
Really good points there. There was one point in there that was made, and we didn't discuss this specifically, but central to the 12 steps is the notion of surrender. And I know a lot of people who have actually gone very far in the 12-step program, not comfortable with that word, not comfortable with the idea of I have to surrender and I have to admit that I'm an alcoholic or addict, as opposed to, I just want to improve myself. I want to change something about myself and I want to move forward. And that may sound like a, kind of an academic difference, but I think there's a different vibe that goes along with that. I'm trying to improve myself instead of correcting something that's wrong with me. And that can be a good jumping off point for a recovery. I'd rather improve myself than try to fix a deficit,
Yeah, very good feedback. You guys definitely mentioned a lot of good stuff. Next slide, please.
And just one more comment before you move on, Katie. Barbara said there's no starting point. You meet the person where they are and what they're able to do.
Yes.
It's a great point. When you have 12 sequential steps, you have to steer everybody to step 1 with the 4 points. Well, which do you feel like? Do you feel like you need to focus more on living a balanced, healthy life? Or do you want to focus more, is urges what's really going on for you? So you can roll in the direction where that person's priorities are.
So going over the differences between SMART and 12 steps, it's a good point to talk about the structure of SMART. So for SMART to be a SMART meeting, it's so important that the structure of the meeting is consistent. And that is what keeps it from just being a group, a drug education group or a process group. That what keeps his name as SMART is the consistency. So here we're just going to talk about the difference of SMART groups being held in the community versus what Ken and I have helped formulate in making sure that there's fidelity at TPH Hospital. So I work at TPH, and that has been the goal as being the supervisor for the fidelity. So in the community, we have they have a system where it's the welcome and the introduction, check-in, agenda setting, working time, pass the hat, check out, and this time can be 90 minutes. But we know that in such an inpatient setting, 90-minute groups is it's stressful. Like, that's not something that happens because most groups are typically 45, 50-minute groups. And two, the patient population, like just keeping their attention for such a long time is a barrier. So in the inpatient setting, we found that doing the welcome and introduction can sometimes go into the check-in. So we combine that. The part that says pass the hat is basically the time where you do donations. So in the inpatient setting, we don't do that because it's not needed for this particular thing. But what is important for sure is making sure we have the check-in, the agenda setting, and the check-out. Working time, of course, and the check-out. So I'm just going to briefly go over what those components are. So checking in is just basically going, talking to the patients and getting them to give information about some things that has happened. So for instance, they may tell you the reason, if it's someone's first time, they may tell you the reason why they're at the group. So what brought them to SMART that day. If it's someone that has already been participating, then they have time to tell you something that's important to their recovery. So the check-in is really important to just get them involved, to bring them in. It's a way of engagement. And then also from what they're telling you about their recovery from the check-in, it helps you to start planning the agenda, to do the agenda setting. So the agenda setting is all about what you're hearing from your clients, to understand that 4-point system. So when you know what the 4-point system, you're looking for motivation. If a client is saying they had hope urges, or if they're dealing with something to do with like their life, so to incorporate that into the agenda somehow. So that's what you're listening for as the group leader. And then the working time is the time that it takes to actually present a worksheet or to have a discussion based on the tools that's on the Smart Recovery website. And my favorite part is actually checkout. Checkout, you never want to miss checkout, because checkout is the point where you can really get other people to participate. So the people who may have been quiet throughout the whole group process, this is a time where you get everyone to speak and ask them what they learned. So as the person who's running the group, it's a good way to summarize or to understand what your patients are learning in this group. And so also keep it in mind that whatever they tell you, even if it's a little bit of what you said, like, that's good. That lets you know that they're listening. So I love to do the checkout, and how I get the patients to buy in is simply just saying something like, okay, it's the end of the group, but before we leave, I need to hear what you guys learned from it. So this is why this is my favorite part, because I can understand what I need to work more on to get them to gravitate the information that I had given them, and also to see what they're walking away with. Next slide, please.
If I could jump in for a second, Katie's also really, really good at the end of meetings is in find the positive. So if there's any way that any of those updates or what somebody checked in, is there any way to accentuate a win that somebody had somewhere, so that that last piece that you get is a positive piece? That's a very subtle little skill, but it's important. It's a really important piece of the meeting. And she's really good at finding that in the meetings about SMART.
Thanks. Yeah, so that is very important as well, that motivation part. So another great thing about Smart Recovery is that Smart Recovery has programs within itself. So Smart Recovery is a brand, and in its brand, it has created different programs that's very helpful for the population that you may address. So there is the Correctional program, which is called Inside Out. So that is a program where it's based on the ideas of recognizing and accurate thinking. So dealing with criminal thinking. So this program is really good for a population and for Trenton Psychiatric Hospital, Raycroft. The Raycroft is the building that housed mostly the corrections population. So it's not much of a difference from the regular program. It just really, really hone in on that criminal thinking, right? So dealing with that. And it's the use of the cognitive behavioral therapy foundation. So getting them to challenge those irrational thoughts. This program structure is a little bit different than the one that I just talked about, in that it actually numbers the different meetings. So there's 36 different meetings where it tells you that structure of, okay, the introduction is 1 through 3, and enhancing motivation for change is groups 4 to 5. So it's numbered along the way. And the longer parts is the problem solving, lifestyle balance, and maintenance groups. And those groups really help to, influence of what the program is for. Now, and to get this into the facility that we're at in the psychiatric hospital, it may not work in that way. So we have to adjust it because everyone is not here for that long, but maybe. So that's why it's really made for the correctional setting. Next slide, please. And I just forgot to mention, so going back to the different programs, there's also there's a Smart Family and Friends program as well. So if you have a loved one dealing with any type of addiction, they have that resource out in the community. It's called Smart Family and Friends. And then also they have online services as well. So it's very good to give our patients, our clients, choice in the different programs that is offered from Smart Recovery or 12 Steps. When I was running the group and when it first happened before the pandemic, we allowed patients to choose if they wanted 12 Steps or if they wanted Smart. And some patients actually chose both. Because some patients actually like both. So choice is so important. So as the treatment teams help with pick different programs for or be a part of the treatment planning, it's really good to give choice. But again, with the pandemic, things had changed. But as we move forward back to our treatment model before, it's good to keep that in mind and planning and helping the patient plan for their treatment. So going back to the Inside Out, here's just a list of the criminal thinking errors that the program really like to challenge. So an example is entitlement. So feeling like the rules don't apply to you is an example. Another example that some of the patients in this criminal population may struggle with is cutoff, getting rid of responsible thoughts. So these are just some examples. Next slide, please. So going back to the structure of SMART and having the 4-point system, and when we talked about setting that agenda, here are the 4 main points, that we want to make sure that is practiced. So point 1 is about building and maintaining the motivation. So there's different worksheets that go along with this particularly. This is trying to engage the patient, seeing where they're at that stage of recovery, to figure out what's the best engagement for them. Coping with urges, there's different worksheets on that, and we'll talk about that a little later. But I just want to make sure that we understand that when we set the agenda, it's based off the 4 points. What can the information we're receiving fits for this population as they're discussing their needs? Next slide, please.
So a lot of what is Smart Recovery you've heard of before. As much as there's some new things to it, as Katie mentioned, the brand, a lot of it comes from other places. It's just a different presentation of other things you're familiar with. So these are some of the pieces that you see: cognitive behavior therapy, a lot of rational emotive behavior therapy. If you're familiar with stages of change and motivational interviewing, some of this comes right from there. The worksheets we'll discuss more in detail. It helps if someone has a familiarity with how groups are run. Again, a 12-step background is nice, but also having a clinical background, just being able to run clinical groups is helpful. The family and friends component that Katie mentioned before is a really nice add-on to it. And then just one specific point, and I hope this wasn't a piece of an element of confusion for anyone, is to me, when I first got into this, I tripped over the difference between SMART recovery and SMART goals. They're unrelated, but SMART goals are part of SMART recovery. So the idea of goals being specific, measurable, agreeable, realistic, and time bound. So that can be a little bit of a snag in there having the same acronym, but they work very well together. Next slide, please. So here is where the actual worksheets are located, and I think time is going to prevent us from going over all of them, and some of them are a little more complicated than others. We will look at a few of them in a little bit. So if you go on to this smartrecovery.org, there's a toolbox, and in the toolbox is where blanks of all of these forms are located. I definitely suggest if you're interested in finding out more about this, I would go check out those forms. And one of the things that we started doing in the Smart Recovery meetings with the facilitators is actually doing these forms for ourselves, so that you can actually see how it fits for you, and then that gives you a nice jumping off point for being able to do that with clients. And we're going to do a little of that coming up. So some of these forms, I'm just going to go through them quickly, are going to sound familiar to you. So for example, the ABCDE form is very much like it's almost like the antecedent behavior consequence form. What's something that triggered a behavior? What beliefs did you bring going into the behavior? The part that is Smart Recovery specific is this DE piece, where you dispute beliefs that aren't helpful to you and evaluate them and ultimately replace them. One of the core parts of addiction is distortions in thinking. So how can we do that? So that's a worksheet that covers that. CBA is abbreviation for cost benefit analysis. And I'm sure you've all done that before, whether it's a pro and con list or the cost benefit analysis that you see coming right out of motivational interviewing. So disarm, again, it's when you give the voice of the momentum, the motivation to stay the same. How do you address that resistance? Change plan worksheet. Again, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have worked with either making a change plan for yourself or working for a change plan for your clients. What are the things that will help you? What's the level of motivation? What are the barriers? So on and so forth. The two that we're going to look at and go into a little more detail about, one is called the hierarchy of values. And that basically just is, what are the things that are most important to you in life, preferably in some sort of order. And another one we're going to look at is called the lifestyle balance pie. And that is an example of, how are you doing in these areas? What areas of what's most important to you are you actually covering? Which ones could you do a better job on? And then this becomes the jumping off point for change efforts. And I saw the link just went up in the box. So if you want to look at the forms themselves, they're right in there. As mentioned before, the urge log worksheet. So for people that are struggling with urges, you can go right into that. And I think we can all relate to urges that are, kind of pulling us away from a change goal, whether it's something like quitting smoking or something that like dieting or something that has to do with, addictions or mental illness. Unconditional self-acceptance. The other one that's really interesting is vital absorbing creative interest, or the VACI form. That one I think is neat because a lot of times in addiction, what is important to people gets kind of substituted out. One of the hallmarks of addiction is role displacement. So I'm not doing the things that I normally do in life, and I'm not getting to the things that I used to get to because addiction has gotten in those places. And that could be anything from spirituality to self-care to, projects around the house or whatever. So what are those things that you're passionate about that keep you going? And how can we start to work those back into your life again? Because addiction has pushed those out. The next slide, please. So here's an example. We smashed two of them into one form here so you could see them. So on the left side is the hierarchy of values worksheet. And on the right side is the lifestyle balance pie. And what we've done is we filled this out with a sample client. And as you can see from this sample client, we tried to pick someone that would be typical of someone in a hospital setting. So you can see this person's priorities more or less in order is sobriety, freedom, with not a small thing for someone in an involuntary or correctional facility, relationships with family and friends, financial stability, and being able to deal with stress. So that's your top 5 on the left-hand side. And then when you get over to the right-hand side, now you get to sort of sketch these out and see, okay, how does this look like? I can't help but think of a pizza. But anyway, moving along, it's the lifestyle balance pie. So you kind of grade what of these areas am I doing better in, as evidenced by the higher score and moving more out toward the edge. And then which of those areas am I not doing so well in? So if we look at this particular person, we can see these 5 domains, and you can see that, okay, the lowest scores are in dealing with stress and with sobriety, and then doing much better in family relationships, doing decently with freedom, decently with finances. So what these forms do is they lead off into a natural jumping off point to, okay, which of these do you want to work on? Do you want to take on the one that you have the lowest score at? Is that the highest priority? Do you want to take on the thing that was the top thing that you listed as your hierarchy of values? I know some of the feedback from earlier indicated you get to start where the person wants to start. And this is exactly it. Instead of coming in the door and saying, okay, you need to stop drinking or you need to stop using, we say, well, what is it you want to work on? And then let's get there. Because chances are, as you're working on one of these, you're also making progress on others.
Yeah.
So do we want to actually do this now? I think we've got time.
Yeah. So that's the question that we want you all to participate in doing, is when you think about things in your life, what is a high value to you? So list things that are important to you in your life. What values are important? And then try to come up with an order of 1 being the most valuable, and we'll go from there. Because when we do these SMART worksheets, a lot of this stuff is things that you can relate to yourself. So that's the good thing about SMART. So I just want you guys to really think about that. What are some things that you value?
Yeah, if you had to pick the top 5 things, what were the 5 most important? And again, you're welcome to share them, but you're also welcome to just keep them up here if you want to, what are the things that you really value in your life?
And also the case that we used was I had a patient in mind who had a history of violence. He had a lot of aggravated assaults, and he was a high functioning patient, very knowledgeable about his substance use. It was alcohol, and also he talked about how he worked a lot. So he kind of called himself a workaholic, as well as an alcoholic is how he disclosed himself. And so I thought about that as we did this scenario, this case study.
Thank you, Tom. So if you have your what I'll call the big 5, then the next step is let's take this over to the lifestyle balance pie and give yourself a score. So if we were going to rate Tom on his, Tom would have to rate himself on his health, his productivity, being sexy, good sleep, and relationships. So give yourself a score, a 1 to 10 score, based on how you think you're doing in that particular area of your life. And then as you can see on the bottom of the lifestyle pie here, they sort of divide it. So you've got the lowest scores and then the highest scores.
Ken, I have a question.
Shoot.
So you rate yourself in each slice of the pie is a different value, right? And then you rate yourself from 1 to 10 on each of those in each slice.
Mm-hmm.
And then do you draw that little kidney shape looking thing?
Yeah, this one came out looking like a kidney. Well, this
I
one's
wasn't sure
also
if that was like a typo that didn't belong there, or if that was part of the actual worksheet.
no, that's absolutely right. You end up with a graphic in the middle somewhere, and the closer you are to the center, like, okay, maybe not as good. Yeah, one of the artifacts that's weird about this is the pie gives you 8 slices. The hierarchy of value gives you 5. So, I mean, you could probably neutralize that by putting 8 things under your hierarchy of values, and then you can fill the pie. Or you just divide the pie up by the number of things that you want to do. So you end up with this little Rorschach-y shape in the middle there.
Okay.
So the shape is kind of, that's just a visual representation of it.
I see a lot of folks posting in the chat if you wanted to look at some of the values that they put in.
Yep. Good stuff on there.
So as you have your rates that you're rating in your life, you want to pay attention to what you have at the high and what you have at the low, and just really reflect on that. So you can think about ways that you can improve your low scores to higher scores, to have what we call that lifestyle balance pie. So you can see the areas. So this pie and the design, what did you call it, Ken? The design.
Oh yeah. It was like
Yeah.
a kidney, a weird. We got this weird shape in the middle here.
Yeah. So that's what. So it's some highs and there's some lows there. So it's just a really cool worksheet to really reflect on yourself and on your life and what areas you value the most, and if you even want to improve and things that you find of value.
One thing I like is there an area of dissonance for you? So is there an area where you put a score down and you're like, I don't like that score is too low. If there's one that bothers you, that's probably a good place to start. And one of the things I think the lifestyle balance pie does is it, to me, creates a springboard for what the next step is going to be. So, all right, if we were looking at this gentleman, we'll say, okay, stress was his lowest score at 3. If this person's really not comfortable with that, like, I don't like the idea that I have trouble with stress and this really bothers me, then that sort of lands, okay, let's go there. Instead of automatically saying, okay, we need to address your sobriety, or we need to, all right, well, let's look into this thing with the stress. Maybe if we make some progress on this one, that'll help with some of the other things. So we can target, stress, the natural starting point. Absolutely correct. So I would also like you to think, if you just put your scores down and you have a score that's bothering you or is lower than you like it to be, what would that natural starting point be for you? And what might the next step be? We're not talking about the long-term goal, but just what's the next step? And then as you go into those other worksheets, they all address that. They address the beliefs that are behind, what you're doing, your creative interests, all of that stuff. So it fleshes all of that stuff out as you go forward through there. So again, I definitely recommend, we don't have time for all 12 worksheets. I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in this, I would print those out or fill them in and just kind of see how they speak to you, and see if they give you a different perspective on something you may have been thinking about changing already.
Yeah. Thank you guys for participating. We really appreciate the feedback. Lauren and Martia, I see you guys have your areas listed.
Cool.
Again, what Ken was saying is just to really take that in and, in Sharona and think about those different areas that you have to be satisfied with it.
I also wonder if it's validating, if the 5 things that are most important to you, you have high scores on, that's a good sign. To me, that kind of means your life is in alignment with what your priorities are. And if there is a low score, okay, maybe that's an outlier. Maybe that's something to look at. Next slide.
So through everything that we discussed in this presentation, there are some barriers that we know to smart recovery in an inpatient setting. So we mentioned earlier the time, what the community does in smart recovery is going to look different in an inpatient setting. Also, in a community setting, the actual participants who have substance use or addiction issues run the program. In the inpatient setting, it's more of the clinicians who run the program, but it's in the hopes that we build the patients up to be able to maybe eventually run a smart recovery group. The inconsistency with participation is a barrier due to COVID. There's all types of restrictions depending on the hospital or the system that's in place for treatment. That has been a barrier. Like I mentioned earlier, before we were able to give our patients more choice where they can do 12 steps or they can do SMART or both. But now due to such tight groups and the timing and different COVID setup, it makes it a little bit more stricter, but that's in hopes that we can get back to that. I mean, we also want to make sure that we stay true to the model. Staying true to the model is basically making sure that structure of a smart recovery group stays in place, because that's what makes it smart. That's its brand, is that structure. When you run a smart group, it is so important that people have the skills to run a group, because it does use theories of cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, and just basic group skills. So we just want to make sure that that is important, that whoever runs the group have that type of background. Again, yes, in the community, it is run also by the clients, but keeping in mind that the clients have been through treatment so much that they're very aware of how the group is supposed to be ran, and they also get additional training as well. So yes, in the community, patients run the group. In this setting, in patient setting, more than likely is some clinician running it, but you definitely should have that type of background. So community members learn from being involved in treatment. Okay, so that's how they're learning. It's just the involvement. Also, I think you wanted to talk about this part, Ken, the involuntary treatment setting.
Sure. So, well, I want to emphasize a point that Katie just made, and that is that in the community, these groups are very often run by people that don't have all that training in things like motivational interviewing and basic group and all that. When you're doing these groups in a facility, you're working with people that are at their most symptomatic and possibly at a lower level of motivation, because as evidenced by they're in an involuntary treatment setting. So I think in the community, you might be able to get away with not having as much of a clinical background. In these facilities, I think you really do have to have it for those reasons. So in line with that about the involuntary treatment setting, it's also complicated because there's a phenomenon where people come into the hospitals and then they claim that they have clean time, and they may have clean time, but it's clean time in a controlled setting. So we'd like to think they have no access, and we know that isn't necessarily true, but less access. And it's a point of some contention whether that's considered legitimate clean time. If you've been in a hospital for 5 years and you haven't used in 5 years because you've been in the hospital, does that translate into 1 day clean in the community with full access to everything? And we're not here to establish and argue that point, but the point we do want to discuss is you're working with people in an involuntary treatment setting and in a controlled setting. So there's part of the environment that's artificial. Katie also brought up the point that there are a lot of patients that say, hey, look, I'm in here, I can't use, so I don't really require any sort of treatment for this. Okay, we hear that argument right here, right now, but as soon as you get to the door and beyond, how's that going to work? That might not work so well. The people, places, and things and all that other stuff are out there waiting for you, and access is there. In some cases, the access has gotten greater from the time that they went in the hospital until now. So that's an issue about that as well. So you may have some pushback regarding motivation because they may not see the need for it right now. So part of your role in facilitating this is you're going to have the need. The need is coming.
So the other part too is that our population is a wide range of different cognitive abilities, whether it's TBI, the traumatic brain injury, trauma, intellectual disabilities. Like those things are barriers to smart recovery because it is very rich material. And so, we just want to keep that in mind and just, validate that. So when we do have supervision, that is something that's always brought up, is that, it's hard to engage the patients in this. And so it's so important that we really just take our time with the material and know that it's okay to break it down. But we'll go more into that with the recommendations. Next slide, please. So here's the recommendations. So yeah, we want to make sure. So I'm going to be honest, when I first heard that they wanted to do fidelity supervision for smart recovery, I kind of was like, but why? It's a community group. Anybody can run the group. But now that I have been doing it, and then we have been checking in with staff, you know, it's one of those things that is needed, because again, you want to make sure it stays a smart program, the brand. And sometimes even the licensed clinicians, sometimes we can start to create our own thing and start running different types of groups and not smart group. So it's just important just to keep that consistency with the smart structure. So that is a strong recommendation to everyone who is running this program. It just stays true to the smart structure to keep that fidelity. And it's okay to adjust the material to fit the population, but what I mean by that is just breaking down the topics. Some of the topics may be a little bit too heavy, it can be too rich. So just break down the topics. If it takes 3 groups to do one, what did we just do? The hierarchy of values, then that's okay. It's okay, because at the end you will hear what they learned when you do the checkout, and you'll know for yourself as an instructor of how to adjust. We want to make sure we give our patients choice. So this is another recommendation. Although it is hard to do in this moment, but always keep that in mind as we move towards getting back to a diverse treatment program, that we always want to give our patients choice for if they want to do 12 steps, we want to listen to what they say and why they don't want 12 steps, and or give them smart recovery. And again, some patients enjoy both. So it's just a great wellness program to have to keep the patients in maintenance, meaning help them maintain their sobriety. So even if they completed drug education and graduated, or they haven't used before they were put into a controlled environment, it's a good group to have to just help them maintain and to remind them of their skills and recovery in a healthy living type of way. Encourage people with process addictions to attend as well. So as the teams are helping with programs, it's a program that's not just for substance use, it's for all different types of process addictions, behavioral addictions. And also advocate and educate others about different smart programs. So again, I mentioned earlier the different smart programs that's available, and that resource for the toolbox with all these resources is just online. It's not far. Next slide, please.
All right, so discussions, questions, anything we missed?
You know, a lot of the feedback that we get from our prep webinars is there's a lot of information and people get really excited about it, and we go too late and we don't allow enough time for questions and answers and discussion. So Ken and Katie were under the threat of something really bad if they didn't end by 3:50 to allow you guys time for question, answer, and discussion. So I better see that chat box lighting up, or if you'd like to speak, raise your hand, we can unmute you. There we go.
I'll block for a minute in that, you know, you've got the link to the toolbox. So that would be the logical next step going through the forms. The other pieces, we have a video on smart recovery on the Rutgers sites thing, that the link that Jen shared earlier. So if you want to go further into this, and of course the website itself has all sorts of great stuff if you're interested in training or additional materials or more background on it.
Okay, so we have Juan unmuted, and we also have some questions in the chat box, but Juan went first. So Juan, do you want to ask your question?
He still looks muted.
All right.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, we can hear you now.
Fire away.
I was actually talking. No, I was just saying good afternoon to everyone, and I just want to thank you guys for wonderful, informative presentation. And I just wanted to add to the fact that I have been using Smart Recovery, not for too long, but I just ran a group the other day on the cost benefit analysis worksheet. It was amazing how that was able to be broken down to the understanding of the patient that we have here at Incline, and the feedback that was given to me as a facilitator. My only thing would be if there is a possibility that Smart Recovery can, I guess, try to put it into like a visual form, because I do have people in my group that are visual learners. So I was wondering if that's something that's going to happen in the future for those individuals. I mean, I can break it down as much as I can as a facilitator, but I see a lot of effectiveness when there's a video being presented to reach those individuals, because again, I can give them $1 million worth of information, but if they can't really see it, you know, it's going to be kind of tough to reach those individuals, because I believe you leave no one behind. So again, thank you for the presentation.
Oh, thank you, Juan. You know, that's been a bit, I was trained in SMART, not formally, not that long ago. And there are a ton of videos out there, and I haven't even gotten through them. There's a whole bunch of them on my YouTube list that I haven't even gotten to yet. So I'm going to have to look and see if there are like little video snippets that might, again, be a nice adjunct to your own bringing the material together. I don't know, Katie, have you seen any videos that are helpful?
Yeah, again, YouTube has some things, but it may not be as short and as simplified as you would like. So, Tom, that sounds like a good project. Because I agree, some of the material, again, is very rich. And I think it's so important to break it down for them and just to pace it.
I think Juan and I are going to have a conversation at Incline about what kind of videos he needs. I think we got homework. I think we got homework from this, and that's a good thing.
Ken, there was another question. How does AA react to SMART? What are their thoughts on SMART recovery?
That's a good question. I don't know if AA takes SMART very seriously. I don't know, I'm going to be asking Katie the same question, but to me, I don't know that AA takes itself very seriously and seems to be like, well, this is the path, this is how it's done. And I'm more of there's 1,000 paths up the mountain kind of philosophy. So that's more my speed. I would hope that everybody's more agreeable to whatever brings more people into the tent is a good thing. That's kind of where I'm coming from in recovery. I know that there are people who have gone far in the 12 steps, and then when they've seen the SMART recovery materials, they really like it because it's a new perspective. If you've been looking at the same problem the same way for a long time, sometimes it's good to have a shift and see it a different way. Sometimes that'll help you make some progress. So I've been giving the forms, the handouts to people who've been doing the 12 steps and are still going to meetings and they're still participating in it. So to Katie's point before, it's definitely an and instead of an or. I'm also curious about Katie's opinion on this as well, what she's seen.
Yeah, so actually, I see that Samantha has a question. What has been your personal experience? So I'll combine them with that question as well. So right before the pandemic happened, we ran Smart Recovery as an initiative. So we had our surveys and we wanted to know who wanted to participate in Smart Recovery. And so we had to sell the program, like tell them all about it. So there were patients who were like, no, you can't tell me about how good 12 steps is and say that this group is better. And so we had to reiterate the message to let them know, no, we're not saying that this is a better group. We're just saying that this is an alternate group. So I think how the message is put out there helps relieve some anxiety for people where 12 steps have worked for them. And there's people who were like, no. But after I ran the group a couple of times, those same people attended the group and enjoyed the group. And so those were the ones who wanted to do both, SMART and 12 steps. So my experience in running the group before the pandemic happened is I had good feedback. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but like in the inpatient setting, it was all good. Like they really enjoyed it. They liked the check-in, the check-out. I used the poster board, and we really got to talk about different things. But it could have been that it was new and it was different. right? It was something different than the traditional 12 steps.
And then there was a comment from Mary who said she knows someone who attends both, and it's just probably a personal thing, you know, like whichever one speaks to you for whatever reason.
Yeah, the idea of personal preference, even in AA, they have a saying, you know, keep it green. And part of that is always be bringing new things in. You know, don't get stale in your recovery. You know, just doing the same thing over and over again may not work because, you know, we change as we get older and our stressors change and all that kind of stuff. So as part of staying in recovery, what's a new thing? And again, you don't have to throw something out to bring something new in.
Any other questions, comments?
Looks like Judy raised her hand. Let's see. Go ahead, Judy.
I got on the video a little bit late. I'm sorry I got this so late, Katie. Hi, Katie. So I do have a question. I know that sometimes in AA and NA, they're very abstinent based and they don't like medication. And I'm wondering, you know, I had the training in Smart Recovery a while ago, and we're going to actually be starting a Smart Recovery group at the STU, the Special Treatment Unit. We'll be starting it, I believe, this Friday. And, you know, I looked into, you know, the prison one in and out, and I think the for now we'll go with Smart Recovery. But I was wondering, how do you approach medical assisted treatment? Because we have that in the STU, and I was wondering, you know, maybe I missed it earlier, but I was just wondering how do they approach that?
So I couldn't really hear you all the way. So you want to know, how do you incorporate MAT into Smart Recovery?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So they don't mention it actually in Smart. It's more just about CBT, that cognitive behavioral therapy. But here at TPH, we have the substance use clinic that Dr. Ahmad, his initiative that he's rolling out. And we incorporate the matrix model, which is just an integrative approach of different programs. And so not only do we have 12 steps there, but we also have SMART, but it's also a MAT program. And so it's not interfering, it's encouraged. It's just an educational piece where we just teach about the different mats and what they're used for.
Yeah, in the and some of you probably remember the older school AA groups where you'd bring clients to an AA group and they would say, "Oh, well, you're addicted to your medication and you need to get off of it," and all that kind of stuff. I hope that that's not current, but we had a lot of problems with that back in the day when I worked in partial care and we took people to community meetings. And then same deal, AA also is very strongly against, you know, what they would call moderate use. You know, it is really strongly abstinence based. The text, the regular text and materials of Smart Recovery doesn't mention those. It kind of keeps it blank, but implies that if medication is part of you living a healthy lifestyle, if that's part of what keeps you well, you know, identical to, well, I need to take medication for my diabetes or whatever, you know, they kind of take that same angle. If that's part of being healthy, if that's part of, you know, your own wellness, then that's something to work on. But you would end up working on that with these forms, you know, where you do a cost benefit analysis. So if you're not going to take medication, what's going to happen? You know, and if you do take it, what is that going to happen?
Well, thank you both. I'm going to stop the questions there because I do want to have an opportunity to post the training evaluation link. And I wanted to bring your attention to some of the resources that and references that Katie and Ken wanted to supply you. These are all posted on the training evaluation, so you can access those links. You can also, like I said, download the handouts. Dawn's posting the link to the training evaluation, so you can access that now. Katie and Ken's information, and this is the link to the training evaluation. I will also send out an email tomorrow if you don't have an opportunity to fill it out today, if you leave right at 4 o'clock. I'll send that out again tomorrow so that you have it. But we really do appreciate your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you next month at the PrEP webinar for June. Thank you, Ken and Katie. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Boom, 4 o'clock. Perfect,
you.
you
Take care.
guys. Take care, everybody. See you next time.